Naughty Dog has been a major development studio for Sony since the 1990s. They started off strong with Crash Bandicoot, a 3D platformer that would eventually become one of Sony's biggest icons of the PlayStation 1 era. From there, Naughty Dog's popularity would skyrocket as they went on to establish yet another iconic PlayStation franchise for the PlayStation 2, Jak and Daxter. When the PlayStation 3 came around, they were slowly ditching their cartoony roots as Crash Bandicoot was eventually sold to Activision, and Jak and Daxter were stuck with remasters and handheld side games. Instead, they were switching over to the lighthearted third-person action-adventure that was the Uncharted games, and those were great. But what really highlighted Naughty Dog as an iconic developer, in my opinion, was the release of The Last of Us in 2013. It was a perfect blend of fun gameplay and movie-quality storytelling with characters that you could just feel with, you know? Graphically, it pushed the PlayStation 3 to the absolute limits and left virtually everyone that played it stunned by the quality and begging for more. Then, in 2016, everyone got what they asked for. The build-up to Part 2 was a very slow drip of content, only giving a few seconds of teasers or simple cinematic scenes at various conferences until the community finally got a release date, February 21st, 2020. And that date couldn't come soon enough. Then it was delayed to May, then again to June. With all these frustrating delays and almost nothing new about the game, fans such as myself began to lose interest. Soon enough, a person claiming to be a disgruntled Naughty Dog employee had posted anonymous leaks on 4chan that sprouted red flags all over the story if they were to be true. Joel dying early on, Joel's killer being brandished as a hero, even so much that you have to play as her? Sony was quick to remove any and all Last of Us 2 leaks and denied their legitimately, but ultimately, they were true. All of them. Through the coming weeks and months, more and more leaks would come out, each worse than the last. Dedicated fans would avoid them at all costs, even so much as to completely lock down the Last of Us subreddit to where nobody could comment anything, and every single post had to be vetted for spoilers. Meanwhile, the self-proclaimed true fans of the series that had read and believed the leaks were furious, creating their own subreddit to discuss Last of Us 2. Day Zero and the game had already had a hugely divisive fanbase. Not looking good. As the release of the game drew nearer, all sorts of gameplay footage were leaked and shared on the Last of Us 2 subreddit, and even with all the context of the story, none of the leaks were justifiable. I myself am part of the second group, and my goal here is to explain every major flaw I have with The Last of Us Part 2, and hopefully convince those who will defend the game to the bitter end will change their mind and accept that Naughty Dog has just done a terrible job. Because of the controversial nature of this discussion, I will try to keep things level-headed, fair, and open for discussion. To start, I want to answer the question of why my opinion matters. I've seen several friends that have wanted to immediately buy the game because they see the 10 out of 10, masterpiece reviews by IGN and all of them just across the board. But here's the thing with those. The journalists who tout the game as the greatest ever are not totally impartial. Typically, when a company gives out a game in advance, there are all sorts of contracts and non-disclosure agreements that must be signed and discussed. I, for one, can't actually say what is agreed upon, if the reviewers are paid, or what, because, I don't see that stuff firsthand. But what I can say is that early reviews are a marketing ploy and nothing more. If a developer hands you a free game weeks before it comes out, you're much more likely to ignore flaws, not read deeper into questionable writing, and potentially just maybe kiss up a little in order to be invited to all sorts of press events, E3 shows, you name it. This is why I'm saying you can't trust all these perfect scores. As a matter of fact, The feeling that big-name review websites were biased is one of the things that inspired me to start reviewing games, music, and movies in the first place. I felt like the common man's opinion was being ignored for the favor of a biased multi-million corporation that sees gaming and films as a business rather than a hobby. Just look at all these different review scores I'm putting up where the audience severely disagrees with the critics. And I think that because I am just some random guy on YouTube with no connection or loyalty to the developers, I feel that that is the reason my opinion matters. So now we're here. I've given every bit of backstory on the situation and established the timeline up to the present. So let's delve deeper into the dumpster fire that is The Last of Us Part 2. Right off the bat, the game has Joel talking to Tommy about the ending of the first game, with some gruesome flashbacks of the Firefly Hospital being massacred and made to make Joel look out like he's a monster. But here's the thing. The Fireflies had no clue what they were doing. The surgeons at the hospital's whole plan was just to cut open and kill a 14-year-old girl for a chance at a cure for the cordyceps virus. Nobody told Joel or Ellie that the procedure would be fatal to her. Not only than that, but Joel is technically their prisoner, as they had knocked him out and taken Ellie from him shortly after Joel performed CPR to save Ellie from drowning. In Joel's eyes, the Fireflies lied to him, kidnapped Ellie, and imprisoned him. Of course he would do what it takes to survive and save someone he loved like a daughter, unlike his actual daughter whom he failed to protect at the start of the game. It was the perfect character arc. Not only did he go from a brooding survivor reluctantly taking Ellie across the nation to loving her as his own, but by saving Ellie, he, in a way, redeemed the death of Sarah at the hands of the soldiers. As a matter of fact, you could make the comparison that the Fireflies are a parallel to the US military at the start of the game. If you read further into the files you can find throughout Last of Us, you find that the Fireflies were somewhat of a terrorist group. Sure, they liberated cities from the government and all that, but they treated them just as poorly. What I'm trying to say here is that Joel's, quote, massacre is justified in a way. And technically, if the player chooses to take the stealthy option, Joel will only kill one person in the entire hospital, and that is the surgeon that tries to fight Joel near the end. In my eyes, the narrative Neil Druckmann pushed in Part 2 made it seem that Joel deserved his impending death. So let's fast forward to the present day in Last of Us Part 2. Joel is a bit older and softer looking. On a patrol with Tommy one day, a snowstorm hits, and in the midst of it, he saves a woman named Abby, whom the player controlled for a short period of time beforehand. Abby offers shelter to Tommy and Joel with her group, and they oblige. The issue with Joel helping someone out and blindly trusting is that, as cruel as it sounds, it's out of character for him. There is a scene brought to my attention in the first game where Joel is driving and sees a man who appears to be hurt asking for help. Joel knew he was faking his injuries and tried to escape the ambush. Later on, he mentioned to Ellie that he has been on both sides and knows all the tricks. Point being, his character should not have been so immediately trusting. You may say that age and a more sedimentary lifestyle has changed him, but I say no. The Last of Us Part 2's opening shows that he did keep things tightly wound in Jackson with schedules for patrols, all sorts of guards, and all that, showing that he still has the same survival skills he did 5 years prior. Back to the story, Tommy unfortunately introduces themselves to Abby's group. As Abby shoots Joel's leg with a shotgun, someone knocks Tommy out, and Abby gives a poor line to Joel. She asks, "Do you know who I am?" Joel says no, and she says, "Guess," as if she really expected Joel to know who this random girl is. On the contrary, Joel actually does have a really cool line in that scene. He says, "Won't you just spit out the speech you have rehearsed and get it over with?" From there, she mercilessly beats Joel with a golf club. At this point, Ellie arrives there after searching for Joel and is subdued by Abby's group and is forced to watch as Abby beats Joel's head in over and over with screams of pain and horror echoing through the house. All of the blood and gore is very much shown on screen. It's heart-wrenching. Later on, it's revealed that Abby is the daughter of one of the surgeons that you were forced to kill in the first game. How anyone there knew Joel's name, or if it was a massacre like Part 2 suggests, was alive to even tell who killed her father is beyond me. Personally, I think Joel was smarter than to waltz into a stranger's compound and allow himself to be surrounded, but I'll even give it the shadow of the doubt and say that it was a lapse of judgment. Fine. I still don't agree with Joel's death, and I think that, at least in my version of the story, he should have gone out sacrificially for Ellie. That would have been the perfect way to end his character. But fine. But what's not excusable is that you're supposed to play as and support Abby as a character. There's absolutely no way you could get me to sympathize with the woman that brutally murdered the main character, the lifeblood of the original game. And if all that isn't enough, Neil Druckmann's self-insert character spits on Joel's corpse as salt on the wound. Moving away from the bitter story for a moment, let's talk about one of the two overall messages that this game has. Are you ready for it? Killing people is wrong. I know. Huge props for such a brave and controversial take. Yeah, way to go, Naughty Dog. Now, jokes aside, this message doesn't fare well in a linear game such as The Last of Us. Essentially, the message comes from the fact that you are brutally slaughtering dozens, if not hundreds of people and dogs throughout the game. As you kill, they let off screams, or whimpers, of pain as they call out for their friends as they die. The dog owners will cry out for the dead dog, and all this is accompanied by some of the most realistic and gory depictions of murder I've seen in a video game. The game's trying to guilt you and shaming you for killing all the people, but there's no real choice. In games like Metal Gear Solid, there's all sorts of ways to sneak by your enemy, knock them out, tranquilize them, etc. And the game will reward you for going non-lethal by giving you special items. And sometimes it'll even change the dialogue to point out that, quote, you enjoyed all the killing. That is, if you just kill everyone in sight. In Last of Us, you can technically get by without killing, but it's pretty damn hard and not fun. It wasn't the way the game was intended to be played. At least in the first game, that is. I actually can't speak for the gameplay of Part 2, only for what I have seen. But whether I sneak by and do a perfect pacifist run, or curb stomp every single enemy I encounter, in the end, I will not feel bad whatsoever, because the game is as real as kids shooting finger guns at each other. It's just pixels on a screen, it's just fake 3D models. Nothing I am doing has any consequence in the real world, so why should I be made to feel bad about it? Take GTA 5 for example. I'll pop in a fire truck and plow through a sidewalk full of civilians just to watch all the bodies fly out because it looks funny. Okay? I know that that's a video game. I know that killing people is wrong, and I don't need this pretentious holier-than-thou message to tell me. Back to Metal Gear Solid, which rewards the player for going the non-lethal route, let's talk about the other side of the coin, Red Dead Redemption 2, that correctly punishes the player for killing loads of people. It'll change some dialogue near the end, make the story a lot more bleak and grim, and even slightly tweaks the ending. And that slight tweak turns it from bittersweet to absolutely gut-wrenching. I hate the bad ending of that game. I will never play it, because it makes you feel for the characters and takes your moral choices out on the characters. Last of Us 2's message is nothing but an unavoidable mental roadblock that just speaks down to you. Because you, for the most part, do just have to kill in order to get along, and then it says you should feel bad about this. I don't want to play a game to feel bad. I want to play a game to have fun. I won't go too deep in this area because I particularly don't like to discuss political issues and allegories and all that. especially in video games. There's a Suicidal Tendencies lyric I like where he says, "It's two-sided politics, one for them, another for me." But regardless, it's unignorable that Neil Druckmann and his buddy, the infamous Anita Sarkeesian, have thrown some sort of agenda, whether to appease themselves, go for woke points with journalists, or what, but it's evident. Now, Ellie was established as a lesbian in the Left Behind DLC, and I'm okay with that. Ellie is a strong female lead, and I am okay with that. But one thing I noticed in this game is that there's a lot of awkward and unnecessary references to Ellie's sexuality, other than her having a girlfriend, of course. For instance, very early on in the game, it's told that the previous night, a man had some not-so-nice words to say to her and was trying to apologize, but Ellie wasn't hearing it, and in the end, he gave her a sandwich to say he's sorry, which she called bigot sandwiches. Not only is that line just pure cringe, but the whole scene felt unnecessary, like it was trying to say something pretentious about how sexists and homophobes will still be prevalent in the apocalypse, something like that. It felt out of place and, I want to say pandering, but I really have to be careful with my words here because otherwise I'll have a mob after me, my opinion completely invalidated, and get cancelled over this kind of stuff, because that's just the kind of world we live in now. But now, let's move on to what I really want to talk about, and that's Abby's design. Neil Druckmann once gave a big speech about female representation in video games, and how they're all over-sexualized and just side characters, going so far to has even mocked the Uncharted series for being male-dominated. One of Naughty Dog's biggest series. Now, I would agree that a lot of video games have male protagonists, but that's because a lot of gamers are male. Easy to relate. He tries to push that females are over-sexualized, and while I can agree to some level, for instance, I think it's awkward fighting a woman in Mortal Kombat because they're all half naked and I feel like my mom's just gonna walk in any second and give me weird looks. But to say that all girls in games are over-sexualized is just wrong. Look at Jill Valentine of Resident Evil, Sadie Adler of Red Dead Redemption 2, the modern take on Lara Croft, I'll admit the old PS1, I mean, we all know the joke about the huge triangle boobs. Aerith from Final Fantasy, Samus, so many more. It's not the plague that he makes it out to be. And you know what? Even some of the over-sexualized, quote, which in his definition just kind of means attractive, even those characters are still strong. Take 2B from Nier Automata or Tifa from Final Fantasy. They're great examples of good-looking women in games, but that still kick ass. But why do I bring this up? This seems like a really long tangent about nothing. I bring this up because Abby, the new, strong female character you're supposed to emphasize and relate to, is completely unrealistic looking in the opposite direction than, say, Kitana from Mortal Kombat. Women and men are biologically different from each other. That's a fact. And it's a fact that can probably get me crucified in this day and age, but I don't care. Muscular women still look like women. Abby is essentially a male body with a slightly female face. Oh, and speaking of this sexualization Druckmann hates so much, get ready because Abby has an uncensored sex scene and it's pretty bad. Like I say, they just gave her a male body and female head. This is not what a woman looks like. And I'm not even going to touch on how she possibly maintains her muscle despite being decades into a zombie apocalypse with little to no food, no protein powder, no common gyms. It's just a total side rant. I probably went on about this for longer than I would have liked to have, but long story short, Druckmann turned so far in the opposite direction for progress that made an androgynous blob as a character and called it a strong female lead. Let's move on to something else before I get called an incel or whatever. Before getting to the end of the game here, I want to cover a few smaller things. First off, I don't really care for Dina, Ellie's girlfriend. There's nothing particularly awful about her, she's just kind of boring and bland. At some point in the story, she finds out she's pregnant and leaves Ellie for her ex-boyfriend. Funny enough, I do actually like the ex-boyfriend. His name's Jesse, and I like the attitude he brings to the scenes, which is unfortunate because he is unceremoniously killed by Abby. But speaking of the things I do like, it's about time I give credit where credit's due. The game looks amazing. The way the wheat fields sway, or the general detail in all the clothes, eyes, and hair, and all the environments, it's all just a graphical wonder. And the way the animations seamlessly translate into another, beautiful. Oh, and the gameplay is mostly the same from Part 1, from what I've seen, but that's fine. Part 1 was really fun to play. If you think about it, this game is like the antithesis to Death Stranding. While Death Stranding has an amazing story and, well, according to some, terrible gameplay, Last of Us Part 2 has a terrible story and amazing gameplay. But to quote Neil Druckmann himself, we don't use the word fun here. So I guess gameplay just doesn't matter. But yeah, seeing how good the gameplay, graphics, and animations are, it just hurts my soul. I was really wanting this game to be amazing. Oh, and also there are more cringy scenes, like there's one where Ellie and Dina find a basement full of weed, and then they talk about smoking the weed, and then they actually start smoking the weed. It feels like a high schooler's fanfiction. Actually, so does the Ellie, Dina, and Jesse love triangle. And the Abby, Owen, Mel love triangle. Yeah, looking more into it, it does seem that, like I said, high school fan fiction for the side stuff. But back to the core of this discussion. Way later in the game, Abby and Ellie are both captured by this cult. Ellie breaks free, releases all the prisoners there, and goes after Abby, who is being crucified out by sea. Ellie cuts her down, only so she can kill her herself. They fight. Abby bites off Ellie's fingers, and then Ellie gets the upper hand. And then, Ellie has a flashback of Joel and lets Abby go. After all the people Ellie killed to get there, including a pregnant woman and probably dozens of dogs, she decides that revenge is bad. And that brings us to the second overdone moral of the story. I swear, that's one of the most cliché revolutions in a story a character can have. Normally it's somewhat justifiable, but no. Abby is in no way a good person. She kills Joel, has sex with Owen even though she knows he has a pregnant girlfriend, kills Jesse, would have killed Dina with her baby if someone in her group hadn't stopped her, and who knows how many Joels she killed looking for the specific Joel in this game. Ellie has every reason to kill her, and the world would be a better place if she did, but she decides not to because she thinks about Joel. If anything, this should push her to want to kill her more. I'm sorry, but this is Game of Thrones Season 8 level of bad writing and Last Jedi levels of poor character treatment. Not to mention that by not finishing her mission, every single thing she killed on the way there is completely in vain. Ellie heads back home, where she has no Joel, no Dina, no Jesse, nobody. But at least she has her beloved guitar Joel taught her to play, right? Wrong. That's where the fingers being bitten off comes in. She can't play the guitar anymore. I'm all for a bittersweet ending, but this isn't bittersweet. This is just misery porn. 7 years of waiting and anticipation for what is probably the most depressing ending in a game's history. Ugh. Like Druckmann said, they don't use the word fun here. And if a story isn't fun in any way, shape, or form, why bother? I wanted to love this game. I really did. Fuck you, Neil Druckmann.